This is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Our congregation, Covenant Mennonite, is a peace church in the Anabaptist tradition. Our model for living is the life and teaching of Jesus of Nazareth, who called people to live lives that reflect the compassion, healing, peace, justice, and mercy of God. We believe that in our worship, our fellowship, and in our everyday lives, the Spirit of Jesus meets us right where we are with healing, hope, and wholeness. My name is Dawn, and as your service leader this morning and on behalf of all of us as a congregation, I want to warmly welcome each person who made the effort to be able to choose to spend time here together, to encourage one another and to meet God. Are there any guests within us that you would like to introduce today or that would like to introduce themselves? If not, let's all bring a friend next week, and we might be able to have someone we'll introduce then. Let's start our time together with a corporate prayer. If you would please join me. We come before you this day, O Lord, giving you honor and glory and praise. Thank you for the gift of presence you promise. Thank you for another day, for the ability to gather here physically to worship, and for our friends that will join us through the gift of all the virtual options. We're mindful of our Christian family gathering all over the world on this day we commemorate as Sabbath. Hear their cries as you hear ours today. Move in our midst, O Spirit of God. We gather and we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. We light our community candle as a symbol of the light of Jesus and the warmth of community each of us brings to this place.
Let's stand in body or in spirit and join with me in singing number 7 in Voices Together. Voices Together makes sense for this song. Come, let us all unite to sing.
Let every soul from sin
In a moment, I'll invite you to use your voice and read with me under what's in the section in our bulletin entitled Call to Awareness. But before we read together, I'm mindful in responsive reading that sometimes we read our parts and we just hustle right through without realizing perhaps what we're reading. So take a moment and glance through what these lines say. Review its content before you elect whether to declare it with your words. Do you notice there are 2 lines about forgiveness? About the difficulty of our actions dovetailing with our words, with our desire. Our scriptures today will highlight these themes. When we pause for confession, when we pause to ask for forgiveness, I'm just mindful of really checking myself to know if I truly desire to live more aligned with what I say I believe. I'm thinking of last week, the homily I shared about the power of words, and I'm just reminded again for myself to mean what I say and say what I mean. So I invite you to join me if you so choose. I will read the leader parts and invite you to read the people part, and you'll notice we'll all read together in the end. Our God, today we offer you our authentic selves, realizing as our Creator that you know us completely inside and out. Our God, we too often try to fit into the traditions around us instead of evaluating whether doing so helps us love you and our neighbors more. Forgive us, Lord.
We desire to grow in faithfulness to your commandments, O Lord. As forgiven people, help us to do so, we pray.
Open our hearts to love you more, and in doing so, be effectual doers of your words of eternal life. We praise you, O God, for your presence among us today. We celebrate your Spirit moving within each one for your honor and glory. Amen. Thank you. And I'll light our peace candle to remind us to pray for peace and act for peace in our world. For our peace story today, I thought that I needed to just ask to highlight the women of Afghanistan. We're mindful and aware of the tenuous situation in Afghanistan with the U.S. troops withdrawal underway and the attempt to get out U.S. allies also. The numbers seem to vary, but as I caught yesterday morning, some 88,000 people have been evacuated since August 14th. Everyone involved certainly needs our prayers, but I'd like to suggest today that we just hold a place card today for the unnamed women of Afghanistan and for one female baby named Reach that I'll describe in just a moment. Over the last some 20 years of Afghanistan, the women, mostly the urban middle and upper class, have enjoyed more freedoms allowed for from their constitution, by their constitution, than in previous years and in former Taliban reign. In 2020, 27% of Afghan members of parliament were women, That's equal to the current percentage now of the U.S. holding seats in the 117th U.S. Congress. Women's life expectancy in Afghanistan went up from 57 in the year 2000 to 66 in 2018, with the addition of 3,135 functional health facilities that were constructed since 2004, giving them access to health care. Maternal mortality declined from 1,450 per 100,000 deaths to 600 some in the year 2018. 33% of girls were in elementary school recently, compared to 10% in 2003. 39% of secondary students have been women, compared to just 6% in 2003. The previous Taliban reign in Afghanistan restricted women's rights to health care, education, jobs, and instituted the mandatory clothing of the burqa coverings. But 76% of Afghan women live in the countryside, and their desire for peace has been a little different. They want the physical aspects of war to stop. They haven't had those freedoms that I just mentioned that were mostly for the urban Afghan women in the last 20 years. 15% of men, though, think women should be able to work once they're married in Afghanistan. So when you think of the whole sense of enough for all, enough shalom for the way God's created us, their partners aren't yet on that same page. 2/3 of Afghan men think women have too many rights right now. And the UN estimates that 80% of Afghan women experience domestic abuse. The Taliban says now that they will not be imposing on women what they had in the past. Instead, they will live out their understanding of Sharia law, which is looked at differently by different countries. At minimum, though, it's now feared and anticipated that the Taliban, once again in power, will weaken women's rights, further tighten cultural restrictions on women, and shrink their socioeconomic opportunities. The United States has the opportunity to retain leverage of any potential aid to be tied with women's rights. Encouragement and connection with our Anabaptist parachurch organizations that have a history of working in Afghanistan, like Mennonite Central Committee, should be continued. I was unable this week to find a story in print of a named woman who was working for peace, but I know there are many. I urge us to remember the women of Afghanistan this week especially, even if we don't know their names today, and to pray for peace and justice for women in Afghanistan. I do want to celebrate a little baby girl, though. And I saw, Carla, you shook your head yes, and maybe others of you heard this story. And it's a beautiful story of women working together that just want to see strong mamas and strong babies, regardless the culture or nationality. The baby daughter's name is Reach, and she comes from the call sign of the C-17 airplane that evacuated her mother and father, along with other Afghanistan evacuees this last week. As soon as the plane was wheels down in Germany, the mother delivered Reach in the cargo bay of the aircraft. So she's the third baby that's been delivered going into labor while being evacuated, but the first that was delivered on the plane, but after they landed. I think this is beautiful. An American medical team ran out to the plane, and Army Captain Aaron Breimer was the head nurse who was present for the support of Reach's birth. and all the other Afghan women evacuees held their shawls up and surrounded the mother to give her privacy in the cargo bay while the baby was born. The mother and the baby are well and safe with their father in Germany, and the mother and father together decided they wanted to name their little girl Reach, which again was the tail sign, the name of the mission, Reach. Isn't that a significant word in thinking of peace, Reach? And the name of a new life, an Afghan woman, Reach. May this baby girl, Reach, have shalom in her life. May she have enough of what she needs for peace. And may we remember to pray for peace for all Afghan people, and especially for the future of Afghan women. We save space each service now to be able to bless each other with the meaningful words of peace be with you, or may the peace of Christ be with you. So I invite you to stand if you're able and to greet those around you with those words of blessing.
Even though we don't have any children here today, I think we can all enjoy a good story. So this is a little story about a rabbit. It's got everything for me: rabbits, adventure, cookies, and someone named Logan. So I really like this one. It's called A Little Bit Brave. Logan was a stay-at-home bunny. His friend Luna was the daring one. She had new adventures every day. They sounded quite exciting, but rather frightening too. So whenever Luna said, "Come out with me, it's fun," Logan said, "Oh no, I never go outside. It's far too scary." At last, Luna had had enough. "You have to come out with me." "No," said Logan. "You're no fun," said Luna. "I'm too scared," said Logan. "Sometimes, Logan, you just have to be a little bit brave," shouted Luna, and she stomped out. Logan tried to have a normal morning. He watered his indoor plants, he dusted his shell collection, and he baked some cookies, but nothing felt right. He was still very upset. Luna had never been angry with him before. "I have to make it up with her and make it right," he thought. There's just one problem. Luna was outside. It would be an adventure, and Logan had never had one of those. He had no idea what to pack, so he took a snorkel, a flashlight, and a tin of cookies. Then he put on his favorite scarf, gathered up all of his courage, and tiptoed out. It was strange and noisy in the woods. There was flapping and scurrying, tweeting and rustling. "I knew it would be scary," thought Logan. He took a deep breath and called, "Luna!" There was no reply. But lots of other animals scampered up. "Luna," they said, "she's the bravest bunny in the world. She dives into the river to collect shells," said the otter. "She rides my back around the forest," said the deer. "She explores the deep, dark caves and goes looking for bears," said a fox. "That sounds so scary," said Logan. "But if you do those things too," said a mouse, "perhaps you'll find her." And that's exactly what Logan did. First, he dived into the river. Splash! Brr, it was chilly, but it was lucky he'd packed his snorkel. There was a whole new world underwater. Logan saw fish and frogs and snails, but he didn't see Luna. Then he rode off with the deer. Whoosh! My, it was fast. It was lucky he brought his scarf to help him hold on. There was a whole new world in the woods. He saw sparrows and squirrels and butterflies, but he didn't see Luna. Then he tiptoed into a cave. Eek! It was lucky he'd packed his flashlight. There was a whole new world in the dark. He saw bats and spiders and sleeping bears, but he didn't see Luna. Logan was amazed at all the things he'd done. If only I could find Luna, he said. She'd be really proud of me. He was so pleased with himself, he decided to have a cookie. But before he could open the tin, he heard a shout. "Stay back, you wicked wolf!" The voice sounded familiar. It sounded just like Luna. Oh no, a huge hungry wolf was trying to eat her. Logan hid behind a tree. Suddenly, he didn't feel brave at all. "I want to go home," he whimpered. But he couldn't let Luna be eaten. So he picked up his cookies and gathered up all of his courage and ran. "No!" he cried. "Don't eat Luna! Eat my cookies!" The wolf was very surprised. "Cookies?" he said. "I don't mind if I do." And he gobbled up the whole lot. The wolf was very friendly after that. "That was amazing," cried Luna. "When did you become so brave?" "I think it started this morning," said Logan, "when I was baking cookies." Luna laughed. "Shall we go home and bake some more?" "I'd like that," said Logan. "But first, let's have another adventure."
For our epistle reading this morning, I'll be taking it from James 1, 22 to 27, and I'll be reading from the Message. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you are a listener when you are anything but, letting the word go in one ear and out the other. Act on what you hear. Those who hear and don't act are like those who glance in the mirror, walk away, and 2 minutes later have no idea who they are or who they look like. But whoever catches a glimpse of the revealed counsel of God, the free life, even out of the corner of his eye, and sticks with it, is no distracted scatterbrain, but a man or woman of action. That person will find delight and affirmation in the action. Anyone who sets himself up as religious by talking a good game is self-deceived. This kind of religion is hot air, and only hot air. Real religion, the kind that passes muster before God the Father, is this: reach out to the homeless and loveless in their plight and guard against corruption from the godless world.
And our gospel reading is from Mark 7, 1 to 8. And as we fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, we have the tradition of standing as we hear the words of the gospel. So I invite you to do that as you're able. And I'll read from Mark 7, 1 to 8, again from the Message. The source of your pollution. The Pharisees, along with some religion scholars who had come from Jerusalem, gathered around him. They noticed that some of his disciples weren't being careful with ritual washings before meals. The Pharisees, Jews in general, in fact, would never eat a meal without going through the motions of ritual hand washing, with an especially vigorous scrubbing if they had just come from the market, to say nothing of the scourings they'd give jugs and pots and pans. The Pharisees and religion scholars ask, "Why do your disciples brush off the rules, showing up at meals without washing their hands?" Jesus answered, "Isaiah was right about frauds like you. Hit the bullseye, in fact. These people make a big show of saying the right thing, but their heart isn't in it. They act like they are worshiping me, but they don't mean it. They just use me as a cover for teaching whatever suits their fancy, ditching God's command and taking up the latest fads." Thank you. Al Weldy, one of our members, will be bringing the homily this morning. I'm so thankful that Al and Carla are part of Covenant, having moved here most recently from Goshen, Indiana, making Sarasota their full-time home. Al is a member of our leadership team, is our liaison for the Pastoral Search Committee, and recently has been helping us organize a Bible study, like a Sunday school Bible study that will start soon. Al tells me he'll bring his family and kids and maybe even the 2 dogs into the homily, so I won't spend time catching you up on all those kids' names at the moment, but we'll hold you to it, Al, to make sure we can meet all of your family. Al serves as Chief Legal and Mission Excellence Officer for Empath Health, which provides medical and support services to elderly and seriously ill individuals in a 10-county area, extending roughly from Naples to Tampa. And get this, Empath has 2,500 employees and many various programs. But with the hospice program alone, Tidewell and Suncoast take care of approximately 3,000 some hospice patients each day. And your organization, Al, has a new fondness in my heart as I was a recent recipient of their care alongside my dad. I was able to close my eyes a few nights during some of my dad's transition to heaven, knowing that a Tidewell nurse was sitting close at hand. I really appreciate that. Al, we look forward to learning from what God has placed on your heart this morning. Welcome.
Good morning. So what you didn't know was my family was on the screens behind you as you were introducing me. So I'm struck at how sometimes things come together in ways we don't expect. So maybe you think that we do an incredibly great job of coordinating the worship service, but I just find it amazing that Dawn talked in both her peace story about change taking place someplace, but also about the need to check ourselves and whether what we say is what we really mean and whether we're really being true to what we believe. And then Rebecca has this great story also about change and action and adventures, which I think life is full of. And so the pictures that I shared were intended to illustrate a little bit of the change in our family over the past 30 years. And so you saw a wedding picture from Carla and myself and a picture for each of our kids when they were young and what they look like now. Part of what those photographs don't show is some of the other changes that have taken place in our family over that 31-year period of time. So we lived in 3 different communities, have owned 7 different houses. I think we've been part of 6 different churches. I've had 5 different employers, 3 different careers in my mind. And so lots of change, and some of you maybe have experienced more change than that. But when I think about the change in my life and our family, it's all been things that we've desired, things we've talked about, that we've planned for, that we've worked for, that we tried to make happen. I find change to be energizing and exciting. And I also understand that I'm wired differently than a lot of people. Not everybody enjoys change. And so I know that I'm wired that way. Dawn shared a little bit about the organization I work for. When I interviewed for my current job, the CEO said, I need to tell you about something that might be happening in the future because you might not be comfortable with this degree of change, and I can't promise you what your role will be or what it will look like. And when he shared the vision and shared what they were wanting to do, my response was, tell me where I sign up. That's the kind of thing that I enjoy. So change has been something that I think a lot about, and maybe because I'm wired in sort of predisposed to action and movement and change, maybe that's just natural for me. But I first started looking at organizational change when I did my MBA program 20-some years ago. And one of the things I learned is that people have different kind of mindsets as to, well, what does change really mean? And particularly within groups and organizations, how does it happen? A traditional view is that change is almost optional. It's something you can choose to happen. It's episodic, meaning there's a beginning and an end. It can be highly controlled. We can decide how quick we want to change, how much we want to change. If we were to create a visual of this, Logan, if you want to put up the next slide, it might look like fishing on a quiet lake, okay? At some point, the people in the boat might decide, you know, the fish aren't biting here, we need to change. And so they would decide to make that happen. They would pull up the anchor, they would start their motor, and they would move. They would decide whether they're moving into deeper water or shallower water, whether they're going far or close, whether they're going fast or slow. And at the end of whatever change they decided they wanted to have happen, they would stop it. They would turn the motor off, they would put their anchor down, and they would fish again. And if that didn't suit them, they could initiate another change later. They could even decide to go back to where they started from, if that's what they wanted to do. I think there are probably examples where that is the model, where people are able to do that. But increasingly, particularly with just the society and the world we live in, that model doesn't reflect very well what change really is like. Increasingly, I think we understand that change isn't optional. Change is happening to us and around us all the time, whether we want to choose it or not. We understand that while it's happening all the time, the pace of change may vary. So sometimes it may be fast, it may be slow, but it's never stopping. There's probably greater risk. The guys in the boat, they're not falling out of the boat when they go to their next fishing spot, but the change that we experience is riskier, and oftentimes means we can't go back to where we were. That's not an option anymore. And so a visual of that might be, the next slide, Logan, whitewater rafting. We're on a moving river. There's rapids, there's whitewater that we're going to encounter. Now this happens to be our family. This is on the New River in West Virginia, and we had a fantastic time on this trip. This was at the end of a vacation. We'd signed up for a 4-hour rafting experience. When we got there, they said, well, we've had a lot of rain, the water level is up, the river's moving faster than it normally does. If we put you in the river where we normally would, you'd only have a 2.5-hour trip. So we're going to take you several miles further upstream so you can have your full 4 hours. You'll get more rapids. So that was all great. You can just see the feet of our guide. I don't remember what his name was. This was a few years back. He was probably in his mid-20s. He had been leading trips on the river for 10 years. He talked about how he knew how it was different depending upon how fast the water was, how high it was, that different rocks and boulders and things were evident, but that he had the experience to know how to do it. He talked to us about how every rapids you can decide where do you want to enter the rapids and at what angle and at what speed and how are you going to navigate your way through, and that he had the experience to lead us, and he did a great job. He taught us before we started going. We went out in a part of the river that was slower and calmer, and he taught us how to paddle. He taught us how to hold the paddle, how you have to lean over the side and put your back into it, how you have to really pull hard, how you have to all do it together. If you don't, you're smacking the person next to you with your paddle. He taught us the instructions he would give, so that sometimes it'd only be one side of the boat paddling, or sometimes both. And then he asked us, what sort of an experience do you want to have? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, look at that boat over there that has a young family in it. They don't want anybody getting washed overboard. They want to get through the rapids, and so the woman who's leading them, I trained her. She knows that. She will take them through the safest way on each one of the rapids. She will make the choices to keep them safest. So they'll have fun, but they're going to be safe. Nobody's going to be at risk. Okay? And then he said, now, you see that boat over there with all the young men in it? I said, yeah. He goes, they're here for a bachelor party weekend. They want excitement. And I'll guarantee you there's going to be guys in that boat who are going to get washed into the river on our way down. And as it happened, we actually saw them going through a rapids ahead of us, and they hit a boulder, and their boat went straight up in the air, and every single one of them ended up in the water. And fortunately, none of them fell on a rock or were injured, and they got back to their boat, and they continued on, but that's what they were looking for. We said we'd like something kind of in between. And so we had a great trip. We got wet. There were times where I felt like I was airborne and not in contact with the raft at all. There were times you just were sort of holding on for dear life. But we made it through, and we had a fantastic journey. And I think in some ways this represents change, ideally for us, that it can be exciting, it can be fun, that while we may not have complete control, we can influence the change and what it looks like. I also think that this might be a model or a paradigm for our life together as Covenant Mennonite Fellowship. I think of the boat as being covenant, and we're the members that are in the boat. And we have a guide. Maybe the guide's our pastors who are leading us on this journey through the river. We've been through change. I mean, in the short period of time that Carla and I have been here, we've met in 2 different locations before buying this building. That's a big change. We've dealt with the pandemic. How many of us 18 months ago had ever heard of Zoom? And now we know how to participate in a worship service, and we've found ways to now be able to include people who aren't physically here. And we've even graduated to YouTube. We don't even use Zoom anymore. We've changed there. So we've had changes. I know from our rafting trip, you don't always know where the next whitewater is going to be. Sometimes it's around the bend. Sometimes you hear it before you see it. You don't always know how steep it'll be, how dramatic it will be, how difficult it will be to traverse, but I'm guessing that we will continue to have rapids. We will continue to have whitewater because we're on this journey together that sort of inherently dictates that. And so I think while I don't know what those challenges might be or what the rapids might be, I think there's 3 sort of fundamental questions that I need to ask of myself at least as we journey down the rapids as Covenant Mennonite Fellowship. So the first question is, what will I do to ensure the success of our guide? We've enjoyed having Linford and Marietta King as our pastors, and we know that they would like to retire, and they've been very gracious about extending that timeline for us. We have a pastor search committee that's actively looking for new pastors. So we are going to have a new guide. I don't know the gender. I don't know the race. I don't know the age. I don't know the experience. I don't know if it'll be 1 person or 2 people. The only thing I know for certain is it won't be Linford and Marietta. And so that means it will be different. The guide in the boat may have a different way of teaching us, of instructing us, of navigating through the rapids. They may not have as much experience. We may ram into a boulder. We may fly in the air and end up in the water and have to climb back in. They may preach differently. They may pick different songs. They may pray differently. They may change the order of the worship service. I know, heaven forbid, JB's back there just losing it right now. But they might have different ideas. They might have different ways that they relate to us. They might be from this community and know a lot of people. They might not. They might have experience in a Mennonite or Anabaptist church and know lots of people. They might not. And so the question I have to ask myself is, what am I going to do to help them succeed? Am I going to ride home with Carla every Sunday and complain about the sermon, that it wasn't like Linford's? Or am I going to offer encouragement? Am I going to offer friendship to whoever the person is? Are they going to experience hospitality in my home? Am I going to try to make sure that they get to know the people in this group, that they get to know the community, that they feel welcome and feel part? Am I willing to lean over the side of the boat and put my paddle in the water and row to help them succeed? Second question that I have to ask myself is, who do I want in the boat with me? The picture on the wall, the only people in the boat are my family. We've been whitewater rafting other places, and we were always in bigger boats and always had other people with us. I assumed that's what this would be. And when we got off the school bus with all the other people that were there was rafts along the edge of the water, and I saw there were bigger ones and smaller ones. And I know this isn't going to make me look good. My thought immediately was, I hope we get one of those small ones and it's just our family. That's not what I should say, but that's what I felt. That's what I wanted. I was delighted that it was just our family. I wanted it just to be people that I knew, that I loved, that I had experience with, because I thought that will make this experience so much better, right? So I wonder if I feel the same way about our covenant people in the boat. I've heard many people here say, well, we want to grow. We want to become more diverse. We want more diversity in terms of ages and ethnic backgrounds and in lots of ways. I'm going to do the dawn check. I would like to say that this morning, but I have to be serious about, so is that true? And what am I willing to do to make that happen? Some of you might be familiar with Greg Boyd. He's a Bible professor, pastor, author, lives in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. He's an avowed Anabaptist. His church gave him time off a few years ago to try to create an international association or network of Anabaptists. He talks about Anabaptism. He's spoken at Mennonite colleges, Mennonite conferences, Mennonite churches. The first time I heard him in person was at a Mennonite secondary education conference in Pittsburgh. Several years ago, he spoke at a weekend set of revival meetings in Goshen, and I got to be his chauffeur. So I got to pick him up at the airport and drive him to Goshen and take him around the 2 days and drive him back. And on the way back to the airport in South Bend, I said, Greg, I said, I used to watch his sermons every week on video. I said, I've heard you in your sermons talk about Mennonite disaster service and what a great thing that would be for your congregation to be involved in. I've heard you speak at conferences and talk about yourself as an Anabaptist. I've read some of your books. I've heard rumors that you're talking about having your church join the Mennonite church. Is that going to happen? I didn't think he would really answer me on that, but he smiled and he looked at me and he said, Alan, he said, Anabaptist theology is like this incredible treasure. It's incredibly valuable, and there's people all around the world that are searching for this. And when they find it, it changes their lives. But you Mennonites make it so hard to get to the treasure. And I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, you were just in the same church I was for the past 2 days. My experience preaching there was the same experience I've had in 99% of the other Mennonite churches I've preached in, and I've preached in a lot of them. I said, okay. I said, what? I'm still not following you. And he said, People sat there with sour looks on their faces like they were in detention. There was no joy. There was no enthusiasm. There was no energy. You all sing songs that are hundreds of years old, and you sing them in a format that 99% of the people don't know and can't do. You act like you're a club, and you get special dispensation depending upon your last name, or depending upon what community you grew up in, or what college you went to. And he said, I have 2,000 people in my church every Sunday morning. They would not feel welcome in a Mennonite church. How can I have them join an organization where they wouldn't be welcome? He said, none of the things that I just described are biblical. None of them have anything to do with Anabaptist theology. They have everything to do with practices and culture and history and such that you insist on doing. And until my people could feel welcome, there's no way. He didn't know that when he was describing all those things, he was checking the box for me, every one of those things. I don't have time to share with you his comments on carry-in meals. That's a whole separate topic. But I wonder, who am I willing to invite in the boat? There's people standing on the shore. They might be interested in being in the boat with us, but they can't get in there by themselves. We'd actually have to change our course, and we'd have to go to them, and we'd have to offer them a hand, and we'd have to invite them in. They might take my seat. They might sit next to my family. They might ask to have the paddle. I want to have the paddle. They might want to have the paddle. Maybe they know how to paddle, maybe they don't. Maybe they speak a different language, or even if we speak the same language, they do it differently. We have different ideas, we have different backgrounds. It's not going to be the same as my family, but if we're called to grow, if we're called to become more diverse, then I think we have to think about what are we willing to do to row to those people who might want to be in the boat with us, and what are we willing to give up to do that? So am I willing to lead over the side of the boat and put my paddle in the water and row? And the third question that I ask myself is, what type of experience do I want? What's my destination? What's my goal? What's our mission? Carla was in a conversation with somebody recently who was interested in this church, and they asked her, so what's the mission of Covenant? I'd be curious if we all wrote down on a piece of paper what we thought the mission of Covenant was, and we compared them. I think there might be some variation. Carla asked me, how would you have answered that? I said, well, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I said, maybe the mission's in that litany that we do at the start of the service every Sunday. So I started paying attention to exactly what we say. We're a peace church in the Anabaptist tradition. Well, that's who we are, not what our mission is or where we're going. We have a couple of we believe statements in there. We believe Jesus meets us right where we are with healing, hope, and wholeness. We believe God welcomes all into his kingdom. That's also really great. That's what we believe. That's not what our mission is. So I did what everybody does when they want to try to find information. I went on the internet. And so I looked at our website. Our website actually says what our mission is. So our website says that we are a Mennonite church dedicated to sharing the good news of God with the Sarasota community and to the broader world. Our mission is to follow the way of Jesus in an Anabaptist peace tradition. So there we're very specific about our mission, sharing the good news to Sarasota and the broader world. And so then I have to ask myself, so what am I doing to do that? We have some things that we're doing as a group that totally fit that. Piece by Piece would be one example. The pen pal ministry with prisoners would be another example of trying to share God's love. But then, of course, I think of somebody like my relative, Truman, who's a retired dairy farmer, who sees the world through an entirely different lens than I do. We are not on the same page, theologically, politically, pretty much from any perspective. he goes to the Elkhart County Jail to lead a Bible study. And he does that so he can meet the prisoners and develop a relationship. And he hands out a business card to them with his name and his phone number and says, when you get out and you need help, call me. He's brought prisoners from the jail to stay in his home with him. He actually brought a man who had been the head of the white supremacist gang in the Indiana State Penitentiary, who was able to be released if he had a family that would host him for a year. This is a guy who had tattoos over his whole body, including multiple tear tattoos down the side of his face, which I believe each one stands for somebody he's killed. They took him into their home for a year, got him a job, got him a vehicle, brought him to church every Sunday. I think to myself, can I do that? Am I willing to invite prisoners to worship with us here, to stay in my home? I don't know what the answer to that question is. What I do know is that the scriptures today, which are from the lectionary, I didn't pick them, they were the lectionary scriptures for today, are about action. They're about change, they're about movement. The